All right, we are live, about to dive into the golden rule, one of life's greatest principles. The one that was pointed out by Jesus as being, the most important rule, other than to love God first and foremost. And the crazy thing is, right? And I think different religions have different concepts of this basic rule, and it really does an awesome job. Like a lot of the rules that have stood the test of time about just choosing to live a virtuous life, being a good person, right? Practicing some of these principles that were taught thousands and thousands of years ago, now have borne out in psychological research as being some of the most impactful, important things we could possibly do to increase our sense of happiness, to increase the quality of life, to have better relationships. So it's really fascinating, right? That, all this time later, we can look back to some of these ancient texts and some of these principles that have been around forever. And there are golden nuggets of truth in them that are so powerful and that really can unlock some of the very best experiences and quality of life that we could hope to experience. So, Mr. David Osk, what do you have to say? Why don't you give me some wisdom on the golden rule, what it means to you, and some insights that you have on it?
What's fascinating is the older that I get, when I think about this, just the idea, right, of love your neighbor as you love yourself. The concept of self-awareness then, becomes kind of front and center there. And then also just this idea that if I'm going to love someone else, that I'm seeing them, in their uniqueness as well. And with that, then, well, that's kind of like, I want to be seen in my uniqueness too. So I'll kind of tee it up with a little bit of a story. So last night, Kate and I were just in the living room there, and we were talking and this and that. And of course, she's my only daughter. She's just, you get it, just absolutely precious. Every time I see her, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so, she walked past me and just kept walking. And I said, hey, hold on a minute. Get back here. You didn't even give me a hug, And she's like, Dad, she's 15. So I'm like, come here. And we had the sweetest hug. And then I pulled her back and held her face in my hands. And I said, I see you. I see you. And it was, I don't know if I've ever really told her that, like, just, straight up. And honestly, like, I could tell, like, just the look on her face was, she knew what I meant by that. Like she got, I'm not going to say choked up, but it hit her pretty hard in a really great way. Right.
Yeah.
And so the reason for my story there is just that I think that's ultimately, the way that we want to be loved, right? I'm not going to love someone literally the way that I want to be loved. But when we see them in, just their image bearingness, right, of God, there's that beautiful uniqueness of the Creator that put in them. And then we love them in a way that's, unique to them. I don't think it gets any better than that. And I think that's exactly the way that I would want to be treated, right? And the way that I'm hoping that I treat other people.
Really beautifully said. I think there are potential ways in which this golden rule, I think, can be misapplied, right? I think you kind of hinted or touched upon some of those, in that, right, there's ways to interpret this very, like, literally in, the way I'd want to be treated. Well, if I'm not really self-aware, right, there can be ways in which, well, I'd want people to just give me a lot of money, right? There can just be ways in which, and there can be ways in which it's applied that's very narcissistic, right? That's
right,
like so self-focused. So I think it certainly does require, I think, some ability, certainly for self-awareness, but for authentic awareness, right? To be able to understand at the core, at the essence, what are some of the things that are really precious about maybe feeling valued in life, being seen, being recognized, right? That I think are really amazing. There are times where like on the introvert extrovert scale, I tend to fit like right firmly in the middle, right? So there's times that I can be really extroverted and I just love, and there's times where I just really want to be left alone. So sometimes I think about, well, in those moments where I'm feeling, more kind of withdrawn, do I want to just treat people in that sense? But the bigger overarching theme on that is I'd want people to be considerate of me. I'd want people to be thoughtful, right? I'd want people to acknowledge or recognize. And if, I go and recognize someone and I see them you know, and I can tell, hey, they clearly don't want me to continue to approach them. But I don't know. I think there's ways to apply this in a way that's a little too rigid and literal that can
Right.
sometimes be off track. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And I think anytime you mix the word, love with rigidity, or, some type of a system or something, that you could probably go off the rails in a hurry. But at the same time, right there, it looks like something. And kindness on a very basic level, I think, is way more powerful than we think it is. But then if you
Yeah.
really want to take something to the next level, when I think about, of course, especially marriage, right? When I get to know, Lisa's uniqueness, right? Just the ways that she's wired, and, her different proclivities in life. When I start to, point those out and honor those things, that kind of thing, well, it just has a much deeper impact than just being the token good husband and, once in a while, hey, beautiful, and, kind of the generic stuff, which is fine. I get it. But at the same time, you know, this idea of being seen and known, I think is just, I don't know, it's so powerful. And of course, the self-awareness, what would it look like then to tell those closest to you, hey, these are the ways that you can, honor me and show me love, and kind of fill that tank, as it were. And I think that part of my life too, by the way, with regards to self-awareness, and just really lacking in that, I didn't really know. I knew that there were moments. I mean, you mentioned quite often the clues, right? So there were moments when, people would do something or say something, and I'd be like, man, that felt great. And then there were things that, that didn't, like, scratch the itch, if you will, at all. And I kind of wondered why. And I'm like, man, for instance, I'll just give an example. So, those who know me, right, know that I'm a vocalist, and when I'm out doing, concerts and so on, of course, I hope when I get done, right, people are like, David, that was beautiful, and that was great. And those compliments, they do mean something, right?
Yep.
But here, what's fascinating, as I'm getting older, especially the last 2 concerts that I've done, I've actually had people tell me, I loved your music, but I really love what you said. And so they didn't know that, but I'll be honest, what I shared, right, from my heart was actually, it took a bit of vulnerability. So for someone to say that they really enjoyed that piece of me, like that deep part of me, and that felt great. And it's because of those kind of moments that hit that core, in my uniqueness, right? I won't forget those.
Love what you're saying there. It reminds me, I mean, so who doesn't love a good compliment?
Yeah.
But when someone compliments me on my character, right, I think that's what you're saying, that core, it's just a deeper level, right? There's a sense of feeling more known. It has, as opposed to maybe a more superficial, a talent that I have, a skill. I mean, obviously I get complimented on my looks all the time. Just totally kidding, joking. Right. But on that stuff, but when someone really talks about, wow, that, required such, vulnerability or courage, or, that showed such kindness, it's just, there's a different level to it. Right. And so as a byproduct of that, I've tried to be much more intentional when I compliment or give feedback to someone else. When I'm giving my kids, right, I'm speaking into them. I try and make sure that I'm really speaking into their character, right? Because I understand that's part of the golden rule. I understand how valuable that has been to me. So that's a really wonderful example there.
I love that. And, it was funny the other day, Parker was, I think he was working with his father-in-law on some stuff, so I had some time, just the house was kind of quiet, and I was thinking about him. And I sent him a text message, and just said, it's just my heart was kind of feeling full in that moment. Right. So I sent him this pretty intimate text message, but it was about his character. And I just said, awesome. You work hard, you show up, you're kind, you're honest, you're noble, you're a protector. And I said, you have everything that I dreamed that you would have. And I told him, I said, I almost feel like my job as a father is done. And he's only 17, but I'm so proud of that kid, because he's got everything that matters, right? Everything else can be, you can learn. And again, you can learn character, but sometimes, to learn character and so on is really hard, and so on. But I know that, when he saw that, right, it spoke to that deep place in him.
Yeah, I know there are other things, right, that I think, for me, when I think about the golden rule, like just general principles, autonomy, respecting someone's autonomy, right, like, is an important thing.
Yeah.
While it's easy sometimes to want to tell people you should do this, you need to do this, I
Yeah.
recognize, right, when someone respects my autonomy, it really is empowering. I appreciate it. We know psychologically, right, that the moment when someone starts to tell you that you need to do things, you feel micromanaged, all that, when you feel like your autonomy is taken away, like it really starts to erode your soul. That might seem like a dramatic comment, but it's true,
Yeah.
right? We tend to resist even things that we know might be good for us, right? Someone says that you should go exercise or something like that, right? If it
Yeah.
didn't feel like a choice that I was freely choosing, oftentimes I feel this resistance building against it when I feel like I'm being told that I need to do something, right? And so
Yeah.
that capacity to both try and appreciate how much I respect and need or want, desire autonomy, but
Yeah.
to also be able to give that to my kids, right? So to be very careful in how I ask things, right? To be, why might you want to do these things? Now, sometimes, right, I just need them to go and do something. But
Yeah.
by and large, as much as I can try and apply that golden rule and trying to respect, acknowledge, affirm my kids, the people who work with me, my clients, their autonomy, I find that tends to get very, very positive results.
The
What do you
one
think
of
about
the that one of the things that I've been learning through my coaching training is, the power of the question. And I mean, it's, so for instance, even with our kids and so on, and I do this with clients, is, if they make a statement about something, right? Well, just follow that up with, well, what makes that important to you? And
that?
as opposed to a why question, why is that
Yeah,
important to you? Because then they feel like they have to explain themselves to me. But if I say, what makes that important to you? Then
nice.
it reinforces that agency and autonomy where they get buy-in on it. And it's, so I feel like the power of the question really goes hand in hand quite often with the golden rule, because,
Yeah,
I don't want to give someone a compliment or do something nice for them, that is kind of a quid pro quo kind of a situation, or, something like that. If I'm truly loving someone as I want to be loved, right?
yep,
Man, I want them to feel powerful, right?
yeah,
I want their sense of strength, their sense of agency, not just to be evident, but I want it to be powerful. I want them to have a great grasp on what they value, why they're making the decisions that they're making, what motivates them, right? And taking action. And also, for them
nice.
to enjoy the impact that they have, just as I would want. It's fascinating when you have powerful people with a real deep sense of autonomy and agency, self-agency, right?
Yep,
A bunch of powerful people with when I say that, I mean confidence, right? You know the bedrock you're standing on, the matrix at which you're making decisions, but then you get those types of people that want a virtuous impact in the world to come together. And I mean, it's fascinating to reinforce someone else's power, as it were.
yeah. So agree. I think one area where people tend to get this, it's not even that they're getting the golden rule wrong. I think the default is to treat other people as you treat yourself, not necessarily as you want to be treated, right?
Right.
But a lot of times, I think there's a book, the four principles or the four disciplines, Don Ruiz, right? And it's got
Yeah.
these four guiding principles, and one of them is to not take things personal, like, ever. Much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But the reason why is that most people, when they are treating, right, they're speaking to you in ways that are disrespectful, or that it's a reflection of their own inner self-talk and their own inner environment, right? Uh, Again, that doesn't necessarily make it right for them to treat people disrespectfully or do any of those things. Not justifying that,
Yeah.
but it's a reality, right? We do tend to take out or treat other people either how we've been treated or how we talk to ourselves internally. And so if we're creating an internal environment that is hostile, right, that's filled with conflict and chaos, then chances are that we are going to bring that out, right? And the golden rule is totally lost. So it does require some capacity to almost suspend, right, the sense of, well, here's what I'm used to,
Yeah.
versus here's what I would desire, right? Here's and to have clarity and to be able to go beyond what might be habitual, what might be feel automatic, and to be able to aim for something that's much more virtuous and aspirational. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love that. I like that you pointed out the, when someone, if someone is treating someone poorly, that it almost certainly is the way that they view themselves. I think and I think you would say too, of course, being, the expert in authenticity and identity, right? When someone is acting in a way that is non-virtuous, they're really lacking not only self-awareness, but they're lacking a true authenticity. And of course, that manifests its way, with, anger and, probably some avoidance or indifference even. There's so many ways that it's that type of inauthenticity kind of, really kind of comes out sideways quite often, with just being, like you mentioned, rigid, at the beginning of the conversation here, and, intolerant of other people, and, all kinds of stuff. But the opposite then is true, right? When someone is operating with that sense of agency, with that autonomy, well, then of course you get, someone who is, where the golden rule seems really natural because it's kind of genuine, and it just kind of pops out and surprises people with, how courageous they are and compassionate, resilient, and, when they bring clarity to a situation by asking powerful questions. And I even think of, it's funny, the other day I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine who I would say just lives the golden rule. Like, he's just, like, it's so front and center for him. But what's really fascinating with this guy is he has a ton of grit. Like, there's a, and then he gives that away too. Like, there's something
Awesome.
about that so native to his personality and his wiring. Like, he's always doing hard things. And, but the way that he ends up, just loving other people it's like he just gives them some more grit. He's kind of passing these things along, and it's very unique to him in that way. But anyway, I love those signs of authenticity, if you will, inside of the golden rule, because the lack of it then is, I think the proof is in the pudding.
Well, really, that's so powerful, right? Like, I think when we are operating with the golden rule, it really becomes infectious in a way, right? And if you think about how I want to be treated, so if I wanted someone to be kind with me, I'd want them to do it with no strings attached, right? A sense of the intrinsic motivation. They were offering kindness just out of a sense of autonomy, a sense out of sincerity, right? Not because there was really some hidden, I want you to buy something off me. Yeah. And so, and crazy, we know when someone sees an act of kindness, right? So the person giving it, the person receiving it, and anybody even witnessing it, right? It has a profound effect where they are more likely than to go out and do something kind, to be happier, right? And so you see this golden rule. Now, the alternative of that, Hans Selye is the godfather of stress. I mean, he literally coined the term stress. Interestingly, his English wasn't that great, and he didn't actually like the term stress and wish he had used a different term. But he created or identified 4 different types of stress. And he said that emotional stress was the greatest and most significant cause of stress. It was the most debilitating form of stress. And with emotional stress, he said, acting in ways that are untrue to yourself, right, is the most significant cause of emotional stress. So, and I believe that's in essence when we are not engaged in the golden rule, right? We all have an inherent sense of what is right and wrong. We all have a moral compass. Now, sometimes we choose, or, we have a sense of values. And when we transcend those, when we act out of alignment with those, we know it causes internal stress. You feel like a fraud. You start to feel, anxious, guilty. It creates this snowball effect, right? And unfortunately, if we don't course correct it, it can build and build and build. And all of a sudden, right, you've built up all this momentum towards feeling really irritable and creating an inner environment that's really toxic and unhealthy. As opposed to when we just choose to follow that kind of our values, we choose to live out of our moral compass. Autonomy is self-governed behavior with moral agency. If you're missing either one of those things, you are not acting autonomously, right? So choosing to do something because it's freely chosen, but it also aligns with your sense of your moral compass. That's always where you're going to find your greatest happiness, where you're going to be most motivated. You're going to have your best relationships. acting anywhere outside of that, and you're going to create an experience where you start to feel more stuck, where you start to feel more guilty, and you create all this inner stress that's really unhealthy for you.
You know, oh man, I love that. And I remember, in the past, I've done, read all kinds of books and done some assessments and things like that. But I remember when I went through your course, the things started popping out, if you will, in a way that just seemed, I'm not even sure how to say it, like these aha moments with regards to, even like the core values assessment, just to start there, right? What does my core value? I mean, we think sometimes that they're just these big questions and that kind of stuff. Well, then when I start to choose those things, define them, and then of course say, why are these important to me?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden I have a just radical clarity on what is, just really important to me. And then I mean, that it's kind of like the baseline for all, autonomy and agency. It's all of a sudden I know what I value, and I can start making decisions, based inside of that framework. And man, talk about the beginnings, if you will, of a beautiful life and a beautiful love. I mean, because then I know even if I don't know how someone wants to be loved, well, I know how to show up in a way that is unique to me, to have a dent in that moment that is, that's powerful because it's me and it's not generic.
Yep. What's interesting, right? Sometimes in life we have to make choices where we have competing desires or needs, and so we can have moments where we desire maybe to belong and fit in, and that's like a deep, primitive kind of need. But maybe that group that we want to belong in, right? It might seem like it has status, it might have a certain power or success, whatever attached to it. But maybe who they are and the values of the group and the way they talk and the jokes they make, all those things might be really misaligned with your values and your sense of that moral compass, right? And so here you've got this conflict between authenticity and attachment, or this desire to fit in and belong. And the easy short-term gain, right, would to say, I just want to fit in. It feels that immediate sense of wanting to feel important, wanting to feel valued. But the more that I go against my values, right, and I choose to compromise those, it will always have long-term repercussions that are much more significant and substantial. So choosing to follow the golden rule, choosing to follow your values and using that as a guide pushing you forward, right? Choosing to do the right moral thing. There's undeniable research now, right? That going back again to living out kind of the sense of what is your greatest value? What are those things that are morally kind of right and make you feel, not superior, but just make you feel good and virtuous, right? That have a holy kind of sense to them.
Love
That's
that.
where you're going to experience your greatest joy. And so being able to define that and having words for it, right? Being able to rehearse it and predetermine those things will help you in those moments. Because if you haven't predetermined what that authenticity is, right? If you don't understand where your values are and what it means to be true to yourself, the power of your environment is really, really powerful. There's some really great research, the Stanford prison experiment is one example where people acted in ways that were wildly inconsistent with what they thought they were capable of because the power of their environment pushed on them, right? And they didn't have the word, they didn't have predetermined who they were, and they just caved to the power of their pull or their environment.
Man, I love that. And I think when you start building the self-awareness, you have a clear vocabulary on what it is that you value and how you want to operate, all that kind of stuff. Not only does the golden rule make more sense and it just comes easier, but I think that there's just a general sense of peace that, that you're not searching for something in a moment. It's like you like you said, you have predetermined the impact that I want to have. And you know exactly who, right, is showing up.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's a great book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow from Daniel Kahneman. Not exactly a short or light read, but, he talks about the fast acting brain just being that impulsive, immediate gratification, kind of emotional brain. And then the slower acting is our prefrontal cortex, right? That's where we access our values. That's where we live out our creatively problem solve, strategically think through things. Now, our fast acting brain, if we were thinking through the lens of the golden rule of that, right, it's really just about, I just want to do what makes me feel good. I want immediate gratification. I want popularity. I want, esteem, all these things. But that is not ultimately, like, the ability to think higher and act on a higher order, right? Where we're able to make decisions and apply this rule through the lens of that slower acting brain. That's the key. You do that, right, in your marriage, the way you lead, if you run a business or you're leading people, right, that's where you're going to find your greatest leadership skills and qualities. That's where you're going to find your impact on people grows exponentially. But that's where I think there's nuance. It can be challenging, right? Because you do have this this fast acting brain that's like pulling you towards one thing, and the slower acting brain, which is where you're going to really find the golden rule applied at its greatest effect.
Yeah, and I think it's just that idea of acting and reacting. You know, I mean, you nailed it. And I don't think there's anybody who doesn't, whether they have ever heard, the fast acting brain and all that, whatever, the prefrontal cortex or the lizard brain or any of that stuff, right? We all understand when adrenaline or cortisol or something spikes, boy, we often say or do things that are, just out of alignment with really what we wanted to, do in that moment. But here's the funny thing is if we've never defined, again, predetermined, like you said, what is it that, that we want to do in those situations, right? Who, right? Not what, but really who is showing up in that moment? Well, good luck trying to handle any moment of stress. And I feel like, as I get older in my life, and now that I've done a lot of that, deep work here, and, thanks to you, it's like, man, I can't tell you how many times I've warded off so many moments that I could have just created just a much more worse situation.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean to say, by the way, that we cannot be powerful and strong and reactive and stand up in a situation and again, be powerful. But at the same time, I want to do that eyes wide open, knowing exactly the reason why I'm doing that and not reacting out of fear or insecurity or, whatever that might be.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I know we got to wrap up here in a second, but I had a good friend. I maybe have used him as an example in here before, but he had predetermined for himself in crisis moments who he was going to be. So, I mean, he would literally drive around on the freeways here in California, which are nuts, right? And he'd have a big jack, right? So if there was somebody that had a car broken down or a flat tire, he would always, right? It was a principle, he would pull over, he'd help them. And he had on multiple occasions, right? In situations, there was one time there was a car burning and he jumped out. So he had predetermined, right, kind of what he was going to prioritize. And in that moment, who he was going to be and how he was going to step into those to really, take care of people as he'd like to be taken care of. And yet on his day-to-day life, when it required, simple decisions and kind of those things that, how he treated his first wife or a second wife, right? And in his job, he frequently would make decisions that all of us would scratch our head like, man, this is so inconsistent with who we know you're capable of being. But he had predetermined one. On the other, it was like he was just kind of, I guess, ad-libbing, right, life. And yet, so he was often responding out of some of those primitive feelings and feelings of feeling often threatened or insecure, all these things. And it led him to a bunch of really bad outcomes. And I'm like, man, if you could just do what you've done, right, in these crisis moments, but apply that in how you live your day-to-day life, it would be amazing, right? You know what to prioritize in crisis. And yet in those moments, right, where it's how do I respond to a difficult moment in my marriage or in my work or an employee when it's getting challenged, it's like he always seemed to put his foot in his mouth and choose the wrong path because he was responding with, he was choosing to focus on the wrong things.
Wow. And I love like you said, to kind of wrap it up here with regards to having the core values, but then prioritizing, of course, people first, right? Hey, these are the people that mean the most to me in my life. These are the situations, that kind of stuff. And you start, dialing down the priority list. But again, it's the predetermining that is the linchpin to self-awareness. It's doing the work before you get into those situations.
Yeah.
That's going to allow you to handle those situations and truly live out the golden rule in a way that is markedly more beautiful and more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think that inner environment, like your identity is found. If you look at like a business, right, and their identity and culture is really found in how the employees that work there know how things are really done, what's reinforced, what's emphasized, how they're treated, how clients are treated, as opposed to a really nice slogan and brand, right, that might say certain things, but your identity is like the truth of what really happens. Same thing with your identity, as a person. It's like, what is that inner environment that you're creating, that relationship with yourself, that self-understanding, right? That helps to create a clear sense of aspiration of, this is both who I am and who I desire to become. And so the more that you act out of alignment with that, we know it will create tremendous stress. It will create a whole bunch of psychological bad outcomes. But the more that you're able to really understand the essence, right? The goodness that exists inside of you, that's unique to each one of us.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're able to act in alignment with that. That's the key to thriving. And I will debate anybody on that. I have no doubts about that. That is absolutely true.
Love it, man. Yeah, I love it.
All right, man. Would love to see if anybody, has questions. Of course, we respect autonomy, so we're applying the golden rule there. But if anybody has any input, insight, comments, please add it afterwards. We'll make sure to respond and get back.
Yeah, and visit your website, the ag-thrive.com as well. We're going to be launching a new cohort of people that are going to be, of course, building that identity from the ground up. That will be absolutely life-changing here soon. So please reach out.
Absolutely. All right, my man. Have a great day.
Thanks.